Well, welcome everybody to Altered Attitudes podcast. We was going to do a comments on some of our past podcasts, but turns out most of them, funny enough, are about money. Like, why should people pay? What was you reading there, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I'll read out the first one here um, by a chap called Harry. So thank you to everybody who does comment. And if you have anything you want us to go over, please do add some comments because we do want to do a proper episode where we sort of answer people's questions. But Harry said, as soon as he said therapist, I turned off. All people need to study is the doctor's opinion, AA. Nobody should make a penny out of the 12 steps. And I'm 27 years sober.
Good for you, Harry.
He's smashing it, to be fair.
Yeah, and
Works for him.
He didn't spend a penny. Look, I think the thing is like, my view has had to change a lot over the years. I'm somebody that sort of also can be very black and white, very, it worked for me, it'll work for you kind of mentality. And, therapy is one of them areas where, again, as a treatment professional and employed therapists for probably 20 years, lots of different kinds of therapists, some good, some bad. I often think it's more about the therapist and the therapy, but that's another story. But, where money's concerned, nothing's free. Not even the 12-step fellowship's free. It just practices corporate poverty that in their book, The 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. The money bit of the program is about each group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contribution. So, it needs a certain amount of money to maintain its meetings.
Got to pay for the space at the minimum, right?
Yeah,
Hire a hall or something.
yeah, even like people saying, well, why are you charging people for that information? When I do, you know, support groups and stuff like that we put on privately, we've got to pay the bills, is the answer. But even the AA, if you want the program, it's going to cost you the price of a big book. You've got to pay for the book.
Yeah, someone's printed the book out. Someone's written it.
Yeah, and somebody's making some money out of it.
Yeah.
A lot of it goes back in, I guess, to the coffers now. Or don't know where it goes if Bill Wilson still has a foundation, but it's saying self-supporting is important. I believe in that. I've lived my life trying to be somebody that's self-supporting. I like to pay my own bills. I believe I should work. I shouldn't be depending on the government unless I have a valid reason for that. If I've got an illness or a disability or some reason that I can't work, and that's what I pay my taxes for, which I make sure that I pay. But I don't think that I'm not dependent on the government. I try and be dependent on, my own hard work, my own investments. I don't have a pension personally. I like to invest in myself because I want to be self-supporting. I truly believe in that tradition.
Gives you freedom as well, doesn't it? You can make your own choices then with what you do with your money.
Yeah, I think it gives you a lot of pride in what you're doing, and you have to take more responsibility for yourself. I don't blame anybody, and that's not true. I do blame the government quite a lot for causing barriers for me to earn a living, which I think they do quite a lot in my life. I do, probably again talking about it, which we don't too much. Might have a rant about it a lot, but I do feel that the government has caused a lot of barriers. But trying to get back to, should treatment be free? Nothing's free. That's the point. Somebody's paying. Like people think the NHS is free. Of course it's not free. It's bloody expensive. And again, looking at that, see, I also pay for private healthcare. One, because I can, but two, I get a better service, which doesn't make sense to me. Is that I probably pay a hell of a lot more into the NHS, and then you go to something like Bupa, which you're only paying a small amount every month, but the service is incredible. And I think, how can they offer such an incredible service? Well, they must be getting so much less than the NHS. I don't even figure it out. So I guess you can always get into that argument of public sector, private sector. I kind of like the private sector. I think when I go to anywhere that's more private, it always seems nicer.
Does seem to be that there's more of an incentive to make it a more viable business.
Well, I think I get treated in a little bit more of a way that I'm actually paying for it, which you don't always feel like that in the NHS, that I'm actually paying for this. It's not free.
Yeah.
You know, like even with the police, you know, you think, man, you work for me. Why are you talking to me like that?
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you think that when people get the idea something's free, it doesn't really have the same value. So that's my experience. Again, when I first went on a Bupa appointment, I was just blown away. I'd walk through a busy hospital to another section where it wasn't busy. It was clean, it was comfortable. I got offered coffee, the clean toilets, the lovely smile, just even the way they talk to you. That you sit and talk to a doctor that you're paying. Again, I'm paying the NHS doctor.
Yeah.
And it's the same doctor. But when you're on private, he's talking to you like interested in what you have to say, interested in, you know, your questions. You know, it's like a whole nother experience. It's a strange thing that, you know, when people pay or you're being treated like you're paying,
Yeah.
you have a different experience.
Well, that's like you say, you're still paying either way. There's just a subtle difference how that money is getting passed around. It's the only
Yeah.
difference. That same doctor, same building, you know.
Yeah. No, I think you can get a benefit state of mind.
Yeah,
Where
it's got to be
people
mental, isn't it?
Yeah, where people think that it's, you know, the NHS is like some benefit that you're entitled to or being given, but it's not. It's I'm paying for it. It should be. Again, everybody hates the idea of privatising it, and I get it. You don't want people just doing what a lot of the private corporations are doing, which is reducing services to make more profit. Of course, you don't want that to happen. But for the amount of money that I'm paying, I want a good service. I don't want to feel like when I'm saying I'm not getting a good service, that I get that feeling that it's like, you know, you should be grateful. And it's like, I'm paying for this. This isn't free. I mean, they say it's free at the point of, you know, walking in a hospital, but it's not free. It's actually cost billions of taxpayers' dollar. And again, I think most of it's a big rip-off. I think if you really want to complain about, you know, being ripped off, then complain about the NHS, because the NHS is overpaying for everything. Everybody seems to be ripping the NHS off, which makes zero sense to me.
Yeah. They have to pay a few quid for a box of penicillin when you can go to Tesco and get it for 40p.
Mate, they did this, you know, for years. Being a director of a business, you think the first thing that if you take over a company, you want to look at what's happening to the money. What are we paying out? Where can we make cuts? And so I had a few experiences where we get back to the recovery bit, but finish the rant first. There's a few experiences. I went to a dentist and said, I'm grinding my teeth a few years ago. And he said, I can make you this gum shield. I said, how much is the gum shield? He said, £250. I said, £250 for a bit of plastic? And he went, oh, you private? I went, yeah. He said, oh, £80. I said, what, you charging the NHS £250? He said, yeah. Right, I knew therapists that were charging over £100 to the NHS. In their private practice, they're only charging 30. My wife had a problem and we needed to buy some plasters, and they were sort of special, but you could buy them over the counter, and they were like 70p or something. And when I questioned it, it turns out that the NHS are paying like about £4 for them.
And that's for one pack of plasters.
It
Like,
was
scale
ridiculous.
that up across
Oh,
the nation.
they not just a few years ago. They had one of these ladies, whatever her name was, do one of these research on what they're doing in the NHS, because you had guys like chefs and that were doing their programs saying how much they were paying for all this rubbish food, and they could get like fresh meat from Wales for a tenth of the price.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense, the amount of money they're spending on junk most of the time. Well, it probably does make sense, but I'll leave the conspiracy to others more equipped to deal with it. But my point is that then this lady did this survey, and I think, they were finding things like a packet of latex gloves that you could buy down Costco for like £3. The NHS is paying £7 for. Now, really, the NHS has got one of the biggest buying powers in the world for a company. It's a massive company. But they're well overpaying for everything. They're not getting the benefits of bulk buying. They're actually seem to be being ripped off by everybody. So really, you could save half the money. Now, that wouldn't happen in a private sector business.
Well, you like to think businesses would cut a company that's doing good, like the NHS, a company that's trying to help save people's lives, that these companies might cut them a bit of a good deal.
Well, you think you usually do when you're buying
Not a
like
worse deal.
100,000 or 10 million gloves.
Yeah,
I mean, look, they just had it on during the COVID, didn't they? That lady so selling the masks, like 70p masks or something, or 17p masks for like, I forget, don't quote me on the figures, but she was selling them to the NHS for 10 times more than me and you could buy them. What happens? What happened to her? What happens to them? Why is it still happening? So my point ultimately is like, I don't think money's the problem. I think it's like just abuse of finances and mindless spending. We do these talks in hospitals. Before COVID, we were talking to about 100 A&E nurses in different groups over a period of time, and we're sitting there chatting with them and sort of say, what do you think the problem is? And often they would say, money. Money's the problem. And so I'd say, well, what do you do with the cutbacks then? They say, yeah. I said, well, before the cutbacks, when there was more money, was it still the same problems? And often they were like, yeah, we still had the same problems. And so I don't really think there is a shortage of money. I think it's just being used badly, if you ask me. But back to this in AA, which is supposed to be free, it's not free. Nothing's free. It says there was another reason for the collective poverty. It was soon apparent that while alcoholics would spend lavishly on 12-step cases, they had a terrific aversion to dropping money into a meeting place hat for group purposes. We were astounded to find that we were as tight as a bark on a tree. So AA, the movement, started and stayed broke, while the individual members wax prosperous. So they even found out that and it's true, if you've ever been a treasurer of an AA meeting and you have like 20 people in the meeting, and the expectation is they put £1 in that pays for the room, pays for the coffee pot. So they keep it at a minimal. And the reason they wanted to keep it at a minimal when you read through the rest of the literature and the history was because there was a group before AA that was quite successful called the Washingtonians. And they reached quite a a lot of people, they were up staying sober, but they had a philosophy of like heading towards the more wealthy in society, the same as the Oxford group they come from, thinking that if they could get the people at the top to change their minds, that would help the people at the bottom. And they kind of lost their way in property and sort of just took a completely different direction. So they kind of took from that it was best that AA didn't open up its own treatment centres. It didn't start doing education or promotions or anything like that. But the main reason is because it's like if they lose their primary purpose, they knew that if they started opening up treatment centres and doing education and stuff like that, that it would lose the primary purpose of carrying this message, that people would start getting involved in property and prestige and arguing, and it would probably pull the whole thing apart, because it would start generating billions of pounds, and then who's in charge of it and where's it going. And so they thought that the spiritual thing to do was continue to practice corporate poverty, to just keep it at a minimal. Pretty much all you need is a room, a teapot, and that's all, and some literature, and that's all you need. If they keep it there, there's more chance of it surviving through time, because there's nothing to pull it apart, which is kind of what kind of works. But I do think that also comes at a price. That, like, where there's not money, you often end up getting a low quality service.
You avoid the greed, but then sometimes the greed can help push things forwards a little bit, can't it?
It
People
seems
might-
to.
Yeah.
It does seem that way, doesn't it? Is that, greedy, I guess this society's like that, isn't it? It's like if you decentivise all of the rich people, what's going to happen?
Yeah. People don't need to make better companies and breakthroughs. And
So it's the same in AA. If you decentivise all of the entrepreneurs by saying, look, you can't make no money here, then it probably won't develop so much. So I don't think that they don't want that to happen. I think they want that to happen outside of AA. So people like me will go and do things outside AA. So AA keeps its integrity. And it's kind of an argument when I first started doing sober living houses. I lived in a house. It was a Christian house. I moved in. They rented me one room, and I drove them all out. I think because I was bringing home people in with addiction problems and doing sort of big book studies and all that sort of thing, and they didn't like it. And so I think they all left. So I was living in this house with 3 empty rooms. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to. I thought I'm going to rent these rooms out to other people in recovery. So I started renting the rooms out at cost. But straight away I started getting attacked, like, you're doing this for money, you're doing this for that, you're doing it for that. And it's like, well, who's going to pay the bills? Because again, I'm not going to go. I never wanted to do a charity, because I didn't see a charity as self-supporting. I see a charity you have to go around begging off people.
yeah. Even then, somebody's got to provide the money.
Not exactly that. Somebody's paying. Somebody's always paying. It's just how you're going to get the money. I didn't think, for me personally, that charity was the way forward, because it didn't fit in with my ethos of self-supporting, that I need to earn my own money. So again, I was earning my own money. I never signed on the dole. I was able to work. So I worked. I worked 3 days a week, and I volunteered 4 days a week. And the 3 days I worked paid all my bills. And so, when I got in recovery, I was living illegally in Canada, so I couldn't sign on. Not that I would have anyway. I looked for work. I've been a working man, and I believe it's important to pay my way. And so I always have and always do. And I pay my taxes, and I think that's always been an important part of my recovery and the way that I live my life. And I've tried to transfer that as much as I can on the people that I'm helping. So a lot of them guys that come in were on the dole, but a lot of the time when the addiction was moved, they were capable of doing more. They would go and, in our project, you'd have to go and do voluntary work or education. You had to be developing. You couldn't just be, because I've been in so many places where people are sitting around depressed, doing nothing.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's very healthy. I think whatever state you're in, you should look at what's your issues, what's blocking you, and start addressing them and developing. So, and it was kind of successful on the whole for most people. They would start developing. We'd get up in the morning and do our meditation and get our day ready, and then them that went to work, them that went to volunteer, went volunteering. But everyone had to be doing as much as they could and contribute back into the community, which worked really great for about 9 years. And it ended up like running one house. I rented them 3 rooms out, and then, I asked the landlord if he paid for the paint, that we'd do all the work and do the house up for free, because I thought it's important to keep everybody busy. So them that weren't working, we'd get them decorating and cleaning and doing things in the garden and which was which is the way I was brought up. And most people sort of bitch and moan, but when they responded, they would kind of like it. At the end of the day, we'd eat together, and we did the house up, and the landlord said, there's a house down the road. If you want to take that over, you can take it over. So we did the same. We could deal with him again. We got the paint off him and decorated it and found everybody some work and some
It's giving people work ethic, it's teaching them some skills, and like you say, at the very least, keeping people busy, isn't it?
It was just keeping them busy, mate. So otherwise, they just sit and get depressed watching TV or, And it's amazing how many people their ambition is to try and sort their dole money out all the time, not to get a career or a job. And so where we could, we'd kind of divert that mentality to say, look, it's not a good way to live, especially if there's nothing really wrong with you and you're able to work. You get a lot from work, not just money. But again, that was the way I believed. That's what I still believe. I know it can be contentious expecting a grown man or woman to go to work when there's nothing really wrong with them, except, probably they've not developed the skills to do that. But, we realised that, a lot of people didn't, they had spent most of their life signed on dole, not working, living in addiction. They hadn't really developed the capacity to do that.
Well, all those skills, that's not something you can develop in an AA meeting a few times a week, right? That needs to be like a more lived experience.
I think you need to, yes, and again, it was like a bridge. I always see it like a bridge to normal living, because again, I always tried to work with the lower end of society. So, wasn't, even though I was private, most of the people we worked with were sort of not the people that could afford going into the private rehabs. It was very cheap what we were doing. And again, I was happy doing it the way that I was doing it. I was still running a building company, earning my money, and everyone else was covering the costs of the project through a very small amount of rent every month, and they're helping out and getting involved in cooking food, looking after the garden, keeping everything nice and tidy. It was really teaching people to get a lot of principles. See, there's this saying I like. It says this. It says, look, and you can liken this to addiction. It's like, look, if you've been digging a hole all your life, and you stop digging, that's the first thing that we got to stop you doing. But if you stop digging, you're now living in a hole. And see, that hole can represent like being underdeveloped, not knowing how to interact with the mainstream world, not knowing how to go to work, to deal with relationships you have at work, difficulties. You know, a lot of these guys had no ability to do that. They'd not developed them skills. They'd not developed the capacity to do that. That was quite apparent to me in the early days, that I was kind of lucky because, again, I've been made to work, you know, and even though I was certainly ill-equipped to deal with mainstream life at any sort of high level, I certainly was equipped to be at the top of the marginal life. You know, I could work hard, I could deal with relationships at work, you know, I could get myself up and get to work every day and deal with most of the problems that would entail. But it was ill-equipped in other areas. But so I realised there's a lot of people that are just ill-equipped, that they just dug this hole all their life. They stopped digging, but they're stuck in a hole. And you still see that around recovery.
Yeah.
You see people that have just been not drinking, taking drugs for years, but they're still on the dole. They're not able to go back into a sort of a mainstream life. They because they've not developed the capacity to do that. It's very uncomfortable. It's like going back into education when you're an adult. It's really uncomfortable.
Or you've got all these preconceived ways of how you live your life, and you've got your routines, and you're kind of hardwired to, like you say, perhaps get your dole money, and your priorities are different, aren't they?
Well, because it's not just as easy getting up in the morning and going to work every day. Emotionally, there's a lot you have to face. I mean, it's like if you're underdeveloped emotionally to anything or mentally, if you've not developed the pathways to deal with that, it's going to be uncomfortable. And a lot of guys in recovery, they're not happy to be uncomfortable. It's not really what they signed up for. You know, they were drinking drugs because they want to feel comfortable all the time. And so it's one of the difficulties that you discover working with people in ongoing recovery is how they're ill-equipped emotionally and mentally to deal with normal life situations. One of the definitions that I like of somebody with an addiction problem is an adult that's not developed or lost the ability to adjust and control their emotional state. So the very nature, if you've never been to work, some of the feelings that you have are so uncomfortable that your ego wants to tell you stay away from work, or they've got emotional problems, they storm off all the time, which again is not really what you can do at work.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember back, you know, I'm 30, so like me starting work was only sort of 12 years ago, and so I can kind of remember that some of those anxieties you get starting a new, even now, you know, you start a new job somewhere. You know, there's a lot to deal with there, dealing with people, there's a lot of emotions, a lot of anxiety. Sometimes you just don't want to go in. You might feel ill-equipped. You might, you know, there's a lot to cope with. It's quite a brave thing to do, actually, I think, getting a job. And if you've not got those just life skills, how to deal with people.
Or re-entering into education. And again, most people coming into recovery, they're like somebody that's had their nervous system stripped of all insulation. So they're super sensitive because their nervous system essentially is, you know, they're wired for sound. You know, they need to get into the world. That's what I call the bridge to normal living. That's what I think the program calls the bridge to normal living. It's redeveloping the capacities. But again, if you've not got people to support you in that, a lot of people struggle to put themselves in difficult situations. That's where I think the collective becomes important. And like Harry's saying, I agree with him that really, I don't want therapists to be the solution to this problem. I want it to be free in groups. I want it to be that being in a strong community of people supporting you and helping you develop work in the 12-step program, learning how to do infantry, looking at your defects of character, learning how to make the corrective changes. I want that to be the solution, because I think it is the solution in the long term. You know, friends can be there 24/7, therapists can't. And I don't think therapists have the answer. I'm not, you know, promoting therapists as the answer. I think they just got a place. And I often say to people, you know, because again, I don't personally have that benefit state of mind where I expect to be given anything really, even if I feel entitled to it. I don't expect things for free. You know, I'm just not. I'm just don't think it's always healthy giving people things for free. And so, you know, often I say to people, look, you know, you can wait for the NHS to get a therapist because, you know, you may have a mental or emotional disorder that probably a certain kind of therapy will benefit you. But you can wait 2-3 years, however long it is, on the NHS to get your 6 sessions. But it's like, did you consider that you can go privately straight away? Now, here's the funny thing I've found about money and recovery and money and spirituality is that, you know, and again, I was one of them people at the beginning that thought, oh, you shouldn't pay for it, it's all free, blah, blah, blah. But then I thought, but society offers many services, and, you know, there's, you know, it takes a village to bring up a child kind of idea that, you know, look, you can certainly go to AA and get, well, it's not free. It's best if you put your £1 in. I mean, really, you should be putting £2 in these days. But some people, I realised, have money. Now, again, they're happy to spend 60 quid on a bag of Coke or whatever it costs these days. You know, they're happy to spend all of their money on drugs and alcohol. But when you say, did you think of going to therapy? They seem like they don't want to pay. And I think that's more of a self-esteem issue than anything else. I mean, even like running a rehab, which was quite expensive, the amount of time that people would phone me up and say, can you help my brother, my daughter, my son? We don't have any money. And of course, if I didn't have any money, I couldn't help anybody. Now, you can go to the local authorities and you might get some funding. But very rarely did anyone ever phone me up and say, I've got my son, my daughter, my brother, my wife needs treatment. Can you help them? I've got a watch. I've got a car. I'm on the dole. I can give you £4 a week. There was just this expectation of helping for free. And you'd think people would give anything to help their loved ones. But I think there's this benefit state of mind in our country where people actually expect things for free. And if they're not getting it for free, then they're not having it. Now, if you ain't got any money, obviously, what else can you do? You need to be ranting and complaining that you're not getting enough free stuff that's not free. But what I also realised is a lot of people have a lot of money and they expect to pay. And And I'm not saying just because they should be charged, because look, my rehab was a low-end rehab. I didn't charge enough for a lot of people to come there. See, we had really good treatment. We had people come from the Priory that felt aggrieved that they spent all that money on the Priory when they felt they were getting better treatment at a fraction of the cost in my rehab. We had an incredible treatment program, incredible treatment program, incredible staff, which cost a fortune, staff. Keeping all of this country's laws costs a fortune. Paying doctors costs a fortune. Paying nurses costs a fortune. Paying insurance costs a fortune. Paying for maintenance costs a fortune. Everything costs a fortune. You bring it all together to then give an incredible treatment service, it's going to cost a fortune. But not everybody needs that, and they don't need that all the time. They need it for a shorter periods, but it costs a fortune. But that always thought, man, people won't come to my treatment centre because I don't charge enough. But see, you realise there's this other end of the spectrum, that people don't want it free. If they think it's free, they think it's not going to be any good. And again, unfortunately, I think that's true a lot of the time. I've been in a lot of charities. I don't just want to knock charities, but they seem very glum, very old, very run down, very poverty-stricken. Good people, but not of very good service a lot of the time. And I know that because, and probably people find this offensive, because when you talk about money, people find it offensive, is that when a lot of them charities come to my project, because we had money, we'd spend it on furniture, kitchens, bedding, decent minibus, decent food. You know, we put a lot of the profit back into, well, I'd say 90%. I'd say 90% of the money that I earned over the 17 years I put back into the project, not into my own pocket. And a lot of them people that come from charities would often say, oh mate, I feel a bit ashamed coming in your building. Our building looks terrible compared to yours. So when you haven't got money, you give up a lot. You give up a lot of what could be used to offer good service. And I think that's kind of like the good part about money, which is why the private sector can be a little bit of a bummer, because they take too much profit that they don't leave a bank. But then the public sector, and again, obviously it's just my opinions, what do I know? The public sector seems to get a lot of money, but to me it's not always spent in the right places. So show me anything in this country that don't cost a fortune. And them AA meetings in them churches, the church is paying for them to be there. Because £20 for an hour and a half ain't enough. No. Somebody's paying, subsidising your meetings. So I wouldn't think there's an AA meeting in this country that's paying £20, £30 a meeting. It's being subsidised. Somebody's paying. So it ain't nothing free. But again, I think there's a poverty mentality that needs to be broken in a lot of people. To say there's nothing wrong in paying for a good service. Why wouldn't you? Just because there's a free one that's unavailable to you, or a free one that's not that great, why would you choose that over one you can pay for? Is it fair? No. Is the world fair? No.
True that.
But why wouldn't you pay for your, like I say, you'll pay for drugs, but you won't pay for a therapist. Now, if you're telling me therapy's useless and no good and a waste of money, It's not true. Therapy is very helpful for a lot of people. Does everybody need therapy? No. I think a lot of people are better off spending their money on personal development than therapy. But it says in the AA book, AA should remain forever non-professional, which I think that's true. But it doesn't mean you don't need professionals. You know, you get a much better quality of service with good, well-paid, well-resourced services. So, you know, there's this idea that AA's got everything you need. Bullshit. It's bullshit. Again, people get a little bit obsessed by it. Go around AA meetings. I've been going round for 33 years. There's a lot of people that are very depressed, very unhappy, very lost. They don't drink. They don't take drugs. But they've got a lot of other issues that they need help for. Mostly personal development. Mate, look, I'd say 33 years people have been calling me from the fellowship. That are 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. They've got problems. And a lot of the time it's like, mate, you need some professional help. You need to go and speak to a therapist. You need to go and speak to an accountant. You need to go and speak to a personal development. You need marriage guidance.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things to learn in life, and you can't get them all from one place. You never. I mean, take just a school, for example. You have different teachers teaching different lessons. That's the way it is in your life, isn't it? You know, if you need something done, you seek a professional's help. You know, if you need your patio underpinned, you get somebody in that knows how to dig a hole and handle the concrete effectively. You know,
well, unless you can do it yourself.
Yeah.
Or unless you can find someone to do it free. But no one's doing anything for free.
No.
Somebody who doesn't pay rent, who doesn't pay gas and electric, who doesn't pay for food. I mean, even like a lot of the charities rehabs that we work with. You know, to be fair, they're lovely people, but they're getting paid good money. They're getting to lovely company cars. They're getting great pension packages. You know, they might be charity, but they're getting paid. A lot of them are getting paid better than me. But people think because they're a charity, they're free, but nothing free. I mean, there's a lot of that stuff comes in my head. It's like, with people, like, part of our program is like making amends. And, you know, when you're talking to a father and they've spent a lot of their child's life being disruptive, causing problems at home, the children's education often suffers. And so I often say over the years, have you considered getting a tutor, because it's kind of, you've got to put back what you've taken from them. So you may need to get them a bit of extra support because they've not had the ongoing support all the way through their education. So, but I say to people, have you thought about getting a private tutor? And honestly, the amount of times people say, I can't afford it. And I'm like, well, how much is it then? And they're like, I don't know.
Completely dismissed the idea before.
Well, they've just in their heads, they think they can't afford it. It's like rehab. When I went around thinking, what are some of the blocks to rehab? Look, not everyone has to go to rehab, but some people do, and it works out fantastic for a lot of people. And we had that numpty from Norfolk, that doctor saying no one needs to go to rehab. It's ridiculous. Some people do. Some people enjoy it. Some people, most people have a great experience and they're happy to pay the money. It's a great investment in their own life.
Well, if you go back and listen to any of the guests we've had on the podcast that have come through ECR,
Yeah,
they're doing fantastic and they sing
most
praises.
people, mate.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, not everybody necessarily needs something as long term as rehab, but some people do, and those that do need it and that they do seek it seem to seems to turn their life around. It's something that you always say is about that development being the 2% of the recovery. You know, if the bridge to normal living is 100%, the first 2% is the abstinence, is the getting kind of clean, and then the 98% is how you live
well, I
your
think
life.
that's it. You have the 2% is what you need to, is the foundation of your life, which is should be your recovery, and then you've got the 98%, which is everything else.
Yeah, and that's something that you can start to introduce when you've got something more long term, like rehab and professionals and therapists and life coaches and, you know, a tutor to help your kids. You know, that's where that development can really kick in, isn't it? And you can start living a real life.
Well, yeah, I think even like private education. I mean, you're telling me that if you're paying for private education, your kid's going to get the same education as a public school.
Yeah, no way.
Ain't going to happen, is it?
No.
What's the difference? You're probably paying just as much for the kids going to the public school as you are for the kids going to the private school. Why is they getting better education?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it don't make no sense. But again, there is this thing where people just seem loath to pay for stuff. It's like, look, I don't totally believe in this system. I don't see people wanting things for free, especially in addiction. It's what I've learned is that, you know, you've got to stop trying to get all the time. You've got to start learning to give a little. You know, learning to become a giver in this world has really made a hell of a difference to my life. You know, and what I invest my time in, what I invest my money in. Again, I'm not somebody that wants to be dependent on drugs. I don't want to be dependent on alcohol. I don't want to be dependent on this poxy government or governments, because I feel they're designed to cause failure for most of us, which they have me. I think they're just the biggest problem in my life are these governments. They keep changing things that don't seem to suit me and people like me. And they become very expensive and make everything hard work, which has been my experience, especially in treatment, that you get driven along by these rules and laws, and each law costs a lot of money to implement because you need people to implement them. And people are very expensive. People have got to be paid. So unless someone's going to give you the money, and I think even like being a private rehab, working with pretty much NHS funding, you know, they treat you like the NHS, but the difference between us and the NHS is the NHS gets given money. We have to earn it from them, so when they decide to cut back or cut us off, they just cut us off. But it doesn't affect them because they're being given money. There's a big difference between being given money and having to earn money. They don't have to do marketing. We have to do marketing. Marketing's very expensive. Google has created monopolies because whoever pays Google the most gets all of the clients. The authorities have cut back all the money, but then they spend all the money on certain groups of people that have certain beliefs that do recovery in a certain way, that are pleasing to the secular society that we live in. So all of the margin people, they don't get any given money. I don't get given money. I have to earn money. And for that money that we earned, we had created an incredible service that ultimately was destroyed by the government, because all the rules and they're making are for their own services, for the services that are given money. So the private sector, I didn't realise, because I went from the statutory over to the private, I didn't realise what a massive industry addiction treatment is. It's massive, because a lot of people won't go to them free services. They want to pay for treatment because they know they get better service and better quality of treatment. And I think they do. And so, you know, And for me, moralising over the years, the same as Harry there about. I don't know if he's moralising. Maybe he's just trying to promote that. And there's plenty of free treatment, which again, totally agree with him, but don't disagree that you should pay for treatment if you've got the money. I think you'll get better treatment, and you'll certainly get it a lot quicker. And generally, companies want to offer a good service because they want you to give them good reviews and spread the word, because they need customers to stay afloat.
Yeah.
And so I don't know whether, according to how good the world would be, if all of a sudden we stop paying all the therapists, close down all the rehabs, and everything was free. I think that would be like a capitalist, not a capitalist, a communist, socialist society that generally collapse according to the internet.
Well, you see it. You just get really long waiting times. People holding on hope and getting getting potentially a bad service, or just long wait times. They might not be ready at that time. It's if you got the money, pay for it. Get it when you need it.
I think so. And again, what's wrong with a capitalist society? What's wrong with people getting paid a decent income and making profit? Again, I think it's not the world that I would create myself if I was in charge, but it is the world that we live in. That businesses. I've always been proud of being a businessman. I've always been proud of having a private rehab that I never turned it into a charity. I paid my taxes. I tried to pay my staff well. I tried to offer a good service. I took very little of the profit for myself. And I felt proud that I was earning my own living, and that people that were paying me were getting a very good quality and a very fair trade in return.
Yeah.
And some people need therapists. It's just, some people need rehab. Some people need personal development. That's why I like our addiction advisors, because I think doing good assessments with people, you can figure out what their need is, and then you can offer them. Say, look, you need this service. It is provided by the NHS, but you're going to have to jump through hoops to get it. And you're going to have to go here, speak to them, then you're going to have to go along with what they're telling you, and then eventually, if they deem necessary, you may get that service in a low-end cost, because they're also trying to constantly cut costs. To give you an idea, at the end of my statutory, like more government-funded part of my rehab, that they were only paying me half the money a week that I needed, that it cost me to care for someone. I had to subsidise the rest of the treatment with the private sector. So, you can offer people the free stuff, but it comes with certain issues most of the time. Or you can say, if you have the money, there's this low-end treatment, or you can go high-end. But people that have got money, they're not going to, because again, you're talking about their children, they're not going to pay low-end money. Yeah. They're going to figure out, look, I'm a Mercedes driver, I want a Mercedes treatment centre. Anything less wouldn't be right. I don't think them people are being taken advantage of. Or they can be, if you're not getting good advice. They're just paying for a service because they can. And I think that's the private sector. We have the statutory, but we also have the private. And I think the private sector's on the whole is pretty good. And I think, you know, more and more, most people can afford it. And, you know, I think it's worth looking at what are your options. Do you know what, I say this a lot, at least the last 3 friends I've known that have had physical illness. Because again, because we went to Bupa and the service was so incredible, did they say, oh, I've got to wait so long to see a consultant? I said, look, did you consider going to Bupa or one of them private healthcare? And they're like, well, I don't think I could afford it. I'm like, well, phone them up and ask, what does it cost to see a consultant to find out what's going on for you? And honestly, the last 3 people, Matt, that have done that, if they could afford it, so they paid for it, which I think is good for their self-esteem, that they got the best care for themselves they could afford, which I think this is what this is all about. Get the best care you can afford. Buy the best car you can afford. If you're buying a hammer drill, buy the best hammer drill you can afford. Buy the best you can afford. It will last longer.
Yeah.
Buy the best shoes you can afford. Get the best bed you can afford. Get the best you can afford. But all 3 of them, mate, they went and got private consultancy, and it speeded up their process through the NHS. So I think that's good advice for people, that if you've got issues and you're struggling in NHS, see if you can afford to get a private consultation. See the difference for yourself,
Yeah.
which again doesn't make no sense to me. Why should it be different? Why should you not get as good a service in the public sector as you're getting in the private sector, considering the public sector's costing infinitely more? But everyone knows it's always been that way. On the railways, they're like, you know, make the railways public again, and that just doesn't go well either. Don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. The world ain't the way I want it to be, but I've changed my views over the years, and you know, we do live in a capitalist society, not a socialist one. And if you keep being benefit state of mind all the time, you know, with yourself or your children, you know, see if you can afford private education, private healthcare. It's going to be better. It is going to be better. If you can't afford it, then you have to get stuck. But even like therapists, some of them therapists can be as cheap as like £30 an hour, maybe even less. Some of them do real concessions.
You know, that's like a takeaway as opposed to a home cooked meal, isn't it?
Well, that's the thing. It's not often, you know, you can't afford £30 to £120 a week, whatever level of therapist you want. You know, you could spend that more than a day on coke or alcohol or fags, but you won't spend that. You know, a lot of people are waiting for therapy for their children. It's like, why are you waiting? Look, if you go on this website called BCAP, British Association of Counsellors and Psychotherapists, BACP, and put in find a therapist, they're all qualified registered therapists. And if you put find a therapist in your area, have a look at the prices, or come on and speak to one of our, if you want an addiction trained therapist, speak to one of our addiction advisors and see if we can hook you up with one. But don't just discount it without thinking, you know, can I afford this or not? Again, ideally, in an ideal world, it would all be free. Everything would be free, food, housing, but it ain't that way. You know, employing people's expensive. Employing good people's even more expensive. Offering really nice services is not cheap. Offering a reasonable level of service is not cheap. You know, fixtures and fittings. I noticed that in addiction treatment, you know, that people are offering all kinds of fancy tellies and jacuzzis and swimming pools and, like spa grade rehab experience, which I guess some people are happy with. They want to pay for that. That's fine. Whose business is it?
Sounds lovely.
Yeah, if you want to pay for it, then there's nothing wrong with that. Again, I used to think it was wrong charging, but I don't anymore. And I know that's controversial, but money always is. But if you don't understand money, everybody needs money.
Yeah, everything costs money.
Everything costs money, and the more money that you pay, well, not always better the service, but do your own experiments. Go somewhere cheap and go somewhere not so cheap and tell me there's no difference. But it doesn't mean you can't get good treatment for free in an AA meeting or other mutual aid groups. There's plenty of free stuff out there. I mean, I give a lot of my time free. I probably give about 20 hours a week free to talking to people. Like, I'm pretty sure I could charge £150 an hour with the amount of experience I've developed over the years of working with people in addiction. But mind you, that's good quality. If you paid me, you wouldn't get any lesser quality information. But I don't know, people down on money, they always have been, always. You're only doing it for the money, is like, it's not true. Need the money, couldn't do it without the money. I tried that in the beginning, didn't work. I had a building company and I was trying to run, in the end, in that street, I ended up with 3 houses, 12 people in them, and it's a lot of work. And because I weren't making any money, I couldn't get any help. Or you'd get volunteers. You can't run something on volunteers.
No.
They're not reliable. They're not professional. Then you've got to train them. You can't do anything in this country without money. So you only got 2 options. Either somebody's going to give you it, or you're going to earn it. Do you need it or not? That needs to be assessed. And that's why I really love the idea of good assessments. What do you need? Some people need a trick cyclist. Some people need a psychotherapist. Most of us need a multitude of skills and things to help us grow and develop. But if you're not willing to pay for yourself and you've got money, I'd say there's something wrong with you. I'd say you've got a really low self-esteem, or you're mean. Because again, people are more than happy to pay for drugs, silly amounts of money for material possessions, but they don't like spending money on their mental health or their development. Makes no sense to me.